Hey there, Grace friends. How are you doing today? It is unseasonably warm around here. There are going to be some record-setting highs in the next few days, and then the bottom's going to drop out. So I don't know what it's like out your way, but fall can be a very interesting time of year. So I hope you're enjoying your Sunday and that this video is something that helps supplement your studies. So let's dive into week 8, day 1. Romans 11:16 through 18 was what we read on that day, studied on that day. If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. And I gave a couple of questions as I usually do, and I asked pick apart verse 16 and explain what you think each metaphor might refer to: fruit, lump of dough, shoot, root, branches. I didn't include olive tree. I should have. That would have been in the next verse. Then I also asked, what are some examples of holy attitudes and actions you see God doing in you or other believers in your life? And I asked people to be brave and to identify how God is working in your own life. Not many, I think only one person shared anything along that line. I don't know. Are we afraid to point out how good God has been to us? That's how I take it. So don't think of it as bragging. Think of it as just showing off what God's doing in your life. So Shirley had a comment in response to what those different metaphors mean. I had in the past highlighted verse 18b. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. I see that as no matter what I'm going through, the root is always there to support me, my faith in Jesus. If that root wasn't in my life, I don't know where I would be. Yeah, certainly. When we think of the vine, we want to be attached to the vine. That's another metaphor, and that is to Christ. He is that root of the vine. So, in that sense, yeah, that's we do. We need to stay connected. We need to find our nourishment from Christ. No other source will do. Erica said on this day, the dough made me think of bread, um, started or yeast. Yeah, I think she meant bread starter. Sorry about that. I have several friends who are sourdough gurus. I have some too. If their starter fails, the whole loaf is bad. First fruits. So here's her answer. First fruits being those who came to faith first before Christ. The root being Jesus, the acceptance of the gospel, which brings life to the rest of the tree, the root of David. Yes, he is definitely the root of David. The branches are those original to the family tree, the Jews. But the shoots are those chosen later, grafted into the family of Christ. So thankful to be part of that. Paul shares that we are lovingly nourished by the Father in this new covenant family, but warns us not to be arrogant. God is the one who creates space for us, and we need to remember that it was nothing we did to deserve that spot, and without the original tree and branches, we would have nothing to be grafted into. Paul is keeping us humble. Yes, indeed he is, Erica. It is something that we need to constantly be grateful for and realize there was nothing that we did that deserved that kind of blessing and grace from God, but we can look at it now and really appreciate all the ways that God provided. Linda said on this day, the first fruit could be Abraham, the father of the nation of believers, or the bread that was an offering to God. The root may be Christ, with the branches being the Jewish and Gentile believers. Um, and she said, how God is working. I see God working in my oldest daughter's life as she is starting to pray for his will for her children rather than what she wants. That's a hard lesson to learn. I'm still learning that. And I still pray for what I want, but hold it with an open hand, knowing God will give me exactly the best thing, which was very reflective of what we heard at our church this morning. The message was really good. Anyway, back to what Linda said. She said, I see it in my life as he softens my attitude toward things people do and wear that I disapprove of, but he still has some work to do in that area. Yeah, I think there are a lot of areas of our lives that God is chiseling off those rough edges, and you're not alone in that, Linda. I am sure there's something, nothing is coming to mind right now for me. Not to say that I don't have plenty of choices, but I'm glad that you're vulnerable enough to share your own. So let me go on to Becky. She said, this chapter has truly hit a perfect time in our world today. I become lost in making connections to Israel. I am still wrapping my brain around it. I know we will be talking more about some of the verses Francis speaks of, but I wanted to share this video, which I didn't watch. I was going to watch that this afternoon and I forgot. So I will do that, Becky. I really love Francis Chan. I'm sure he's got some really insightful things to share. So if you've not watched it, the link is in this comment thread. So go to that wall and you'll see it there. She also added, when I initially read the verses, I felt God is the root. But after reading some different commentaries, I wonder if God is the whole tree with Israel being the root. But out of Israel came Jesus, so maybe the root could be both. Yeah, commentaries, we can look at commentaries. They can point us to the right view. But even Bible scholars disagree on what the metaphors mean. So I just thought it would be a fun assignment for us to think through. So thanks for doing a little extra research and sharing that resource, Becky. David had a comment on this day. He said, reading these verses after recent events, I think of the root as the Jews who have treasured the word from earliest times. More locally in time, the root is the teachers who have welcomed me into Christ. Yeah, we can look at it in terms of our own life too. So he said, I, the wild olive shoot of verse 18, honor and revere these roots and guard myself against arrogance. And that's another example, even though I'm not sure you meant it this way, David, of God at work in your life. Anytime there's humility brought from arrogance, I think of God. God's doing that work. Iris said, as I read the question, my mind went back to Isaiah 11:10. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. Where Jesus is referred to as the root of Jesse, and I'm inclined to see the root as Jesus, the thing that all believers must be grounded in to survive in this world. Yes. He is that root. He's the one that keeps us from toppling over, keeps us strong when the winds of adversity come. She also added, I love the idea that a shoot of faith can grow up and be grafted into the original tree through difficult circumstances, through the hardships of life, and the many things that try to grab our faith, devotion to God. It fosters this shoot to sprout, be grafted in, and be part of his family tree. I am that shoot, and I am soaking in the imagery today. I'm glad you are, Iris. And yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about difficulties in life, making those roots go down deeper and helping us to remain strong. And I don't even know, I'm not a gardener per se, or I don't husbandry. Is that what they do with trees? I'm not sure. But anyway, I know that grafting in a branch and changing really the shape of the tree, the type of fruit even that tree produces, is something I'm not fully aware of how it plays out. But I would think it could make the tree better, if not stronger. So in this case, we know that inviting the Gentiles in was a really good move. God had our best in mind, whether the Jews embrace that truth or not. It's true. She added, here's Iris again, first fruits, most likely Abraham and the patriarchs. No, wait a minute. This is me. This is my notes. I just went to my book and I kind of looked through what did I say in the book? And I said first fruits was most likely Abraham and the patriarchs. Some think it was the first Jewish Christ followers. So not all Christ followers, but that first fruits, because it's the first, we are the fruit of that tree if we are believers, if we're Gentile believers, but we're not the first fruits. The Jews were the first fruits. Or like I said, Abraham, who that was really the first fruit, one person. Among him came many first fruits. Also, I said root probably relates to the patriarchs and Christ, or Christ alone. It could be any of those options. A lot of you want to attribute the root to Christ, and I think that's a good place to land one way or another. He is the root that fed the patriarchs that faith in him. So, and then the branches, just the branches, that when it's mentioned as branches rather than wild branches, it is the Jews. And the Jews that were broken off, that mentioned broken off branches, those are the Jews that were not believers, or chose to reject Christ. And then, of course, the wild branches, many of you guessed this, or the sprouts, the shoots, are the Gentile believers. And like I said, I didn't mention the olive tree, but the olive tree is actually a reference to Israel. So I think that's kind of interesting, although you think of Jesus being that tree, but I guess he is the root of that olive tree. So, and very often they say what you see above ground is even more massive underground. The root just system can go. And I know that we've got this huge tree in our front yard, and the roots are going into underneath the foundation of our house and kind of making some of our floors a little wonky. But yeah, it has to seek out that water source, and it will do that by expanding its root system, making the tree stronger. Also, let me see here. Da, 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 da. I wanted to add my thoughts on the question about how God changes us, what changes you've seen. And really, I couldn't think of any specific thing other than, and here's a shout out to my husband. He said to tell him hi. Hi, Gary. When he and I get into a conflict, um, and there's a moment when we can pull away and pray and come back. I definitely see a difference in him, a humility in him. I think he would say the same for me. I do think that God softens our hearts and opens our eyes, gives us that humbleness that we wouldn't have any other way. But it's always after we've prayed. Typically, it doesn't happen in the heat of the moment, unfortunately. We're working on that, but it's not quite there. Um, on week 8, day 2, we read Romans 11:19 through 22. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud by fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. So pretty strong, black and white kind of words there. I had a couple of questions again. What does your fear of God express and demonstrate to him and others? We mentioned the fear of God. Let's see here. It says, so do not become proud, but fear in verse 20. And then I added, what would be offensive if the Gentiles became proud about being grafted into the olive tree of God? And I said the redeemed in that sense. The olive tree it is Israel, but it is also the redeemed. So let's just paint with a broad stroke there. So um, here's what Linda said regarding what does the fear of God express to others. She said, I hope my fear of and reverence for God shows through the way I live my life every day. I don't use bad language and never take his name in vain. I try to put others first and live the way he wants us to live. I often fall short, but with his help, I keep trying. I'm glad you do. I keep persevering too in that. I often fail at times too, but there is so much fruit and growth that comes from my life that I know can't come from me. So like you, Linda, I do feel like there is that evidence of God his work in me. And that fear is expressed through those things. I added the question, what would be offensive if the Gentiles became proud? And she said, this is Linda again, it would almost be ironic for the Gentiles to become proud of being let in when that happened in order to make the Jews jealous. If they became proud, it might show God they didn't belong in his kingdom any more than the unbelieving Jews. Interesting point. Yeah, I do think it is definitely an evidence that they were taking his grace for granted if they took that kind of line where they were proud of being included. It really leaves us all in a humbled position, Jew and Gentile. Erica said, I may have overtyped on day 1 and answered this question there. Sorry, I really love these verses. God makes space for all who believe in him, and he keeps the whole tree nourished as we remain in him. He tends us lovingly as the gardener. Yes, He is the loving gardener, and I'm so glad he's included all of us in that tree. Iris said, what would be, this is in regard to what would be offensive if the Gentiles became proud. She said, it seems that for the Gentiles to become proud of being grafted in shows hearts becoming hard, too focused on themselves. And it sounds suspiciously like the Pharisees. It does. That attitude takes the focus off of Jesus and puts it onto us. And anytime we try to take credit or claim worthiness, it is offensive to God for sure. Only Jesus can have that title in place. We just always need to remember that. So thanks for that reminder, Iris, and that's so true. And then here's my response to what does your fear of God express and demonstrate? I think it demonstrates respect, of course, and I think it demonstrates worship. Our humility and unworthiness are set against God's greatness and his ultimate, complete worthiness. And I also thought of the verse Philippians 2:12 that says, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That was the segment that that I remembered as I was thinking through this question. Fear and trembling. We're working out our salvation. So I think the fear of God demonstrates our faith in a way that can cause us to tremble, which is an involuntary movement within our bodies. I think it can move us physically as well as spiritually if we're really setting our hearts right and viewing God with the right lens. So that's my 2 cents worth on the fear of God. In week 8, day 3, we read Romans 11:23-25, and even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again. For if you are cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery. Brothers, a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So I wonder what that fullness represents. I don't know in God's that's the mystery of how much longer will God be patient and wait on Gentiles to respond before he really pursues that remnant and opens up the gospel to them. Not that he hasn't already, but there's going to be a harder pressing in to draw them to his salvation. And here's what a couple of questions I ask. Why do non-Jewish believers always need to keep in mind that they have been grafted into the olive tree of God's family? And what do you find mysterious about God's partial hardening of the Jews? What is beautiful about it? Linda said, the Gentiles need to always remember the gift that has been given of becoming a part of the family of God. It's so easy to take it for granted or think we are just entitled to it. We need to remain constantly humble and grateful for God's amazing gift. Easy to do. It's easy for humans to take things for granted. And so it's easy for us as believers to take our salvation for granted and think, of course, why shouldn't I be included in that olive tree? But it is of the grace of God that we have that. So we need to always remember that. And then she added, in response to why do you find it mysterious about God's partial hardening? She said, it does seem strange that God would deem a partial hardening of his chosen people. In our feeble minds, it seems he would want all to be included and not shut some off prematurely. The beautiful thing about it is the opening until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Yeah, that is a beautiful statement to think about the fullness of Gentiles. And she went on to add, he was making a way for all people to come to him and be a part of his family. Yeah, so the cup is full there when you think of it that way instead of half full. It was completely full in the sense that he's bringing those Gentiles in and filling that cup and waiting until the very last Gentile is included. I'm not saying that it's going to happen quite like I'm saying linear, but there is that fullness that he is looking for. Erica said, God is powerful enough to graft the Jews back into the tree they turn from. So cool. He is more powerful than nature, and every person that he has chosen and that acknowledges him will be grafted in. Yeah, that's very true. And then she added, in response to what do you find mysterious about God's partial hardening? She said, God has a purpose for the partial hardening. He does, and we don't always know. It's a mysterious purpose. And she said, I would guess that it will open the door for even more to come to him. And I think that's a very good guess. And even scripture supports that idea that it is about bringing in more Gentiles and making the Jews jealous so that more will come in. So yeah, both are good answers there, Erica. Um, and like Linda, I think it is mysterious, that hardening, that partial hardening. I do think it's mysterious that God decided not to bring in all. But here's what I think about that. I think that it might actually lessen the greatness of his grace. Like a rare gem, when you find a diamond that is rare, it makes it more valuable. And so I think it's in the same way that God's grace, if he dispensed it to everybody, it almost makes it no longer grace. It makes it community property, which is not really what I want. I want that rare gem that I can have as my own, and I'm a part of that calling to Christ, who offers that rare gem of his grace and salvation. So I'm going to value it. I'm going to see the preciousness of it. It increases because it is so rare, and not many go that way. We don't go down the narrow path. Many go that broad path where it's much easier. So I want to value it. I want to see it from that angle. And I hope you do too. I hope you have a great week. We're going into our very last week of the study, week 9. We'll be wrapping up. And I hope that you have learned a lot about God and how he thinks. The next and last in the series, which is Grace Unites, will take us into even more about God's character and some really relevant uh, topics related to Israel and just not even that, just so much of our societies these days are struggling with acceptance and being eh, willing to unite with others who are not exactly like us. That last book in this Roman series and the last few chapters of Romans will take us into those very difficult waters where we need all the wisdom we can get, following Paul's example, understanding God's word about how to respond to others and reunite with other believers. So I hope you'll stay with me into the next in the series. It'll start in January. Thanks for listening and have a great week. Bye.